So yeah, maybe let's go ahead and get started. End of today's session, the last session, the thing that sits between the ice cream and the beer. So thanks a lot for taking the time to actually sacrifice the ice cream and come to the session. Today I will be talking about user research. Some of you might have seen user research, some of you might have been part of user research. But today we're going to take a slightly different turn and show why it's a very simple skill, why it's not something that you come like born with, and how you can actually apply it for every project that you have. User research is very simple. It's basically asking deliberate questions about a problem that you care about, working with particular and actual users methodologically to find out the answers and the needs, and then discussing the findings with your team to design possible solutions. It is very, very simple. You can actually do any type of user research in 3 simple steps. First step is to find the problem and the questions. The second step is to work with the actual users to discover the answers. And the third step is to analyze and discuss it with your team so that you have better design understandings, better insights, and better products overall. So why then, when we start a project with design, this is the reaction that we get. I worked on more than 160 products that reach more than 160 million people. I worked with small teams, large teams, multinational teams. But whenever we started with research, whenever we said we wanted to start with research, this is the reaction that we got. We said, no, and we heard a lot of excuses. The first excuse that we heard was, well, yeah, we already asked people. The thing is, asking is a part of user research. It's a big part of user research, but it is not only just going to users and saying, what do you want? That is a very bad approach, actually, which I'll talk about. The other excuse that we heard was, we already know what the users want. Like, we had a meeting and we discussed about what we think they wanted. But the fact is that the users were probably not in that meeting room. It is very good to have discussions with your internal teams. It is very good to share ideas. But once you are in that user research space, you need to talk to the users. So a big meeting is not a replacement for good user research. Another excuse is the fact that we don't have time. There are certain design methods, there are certain user research methods that actually take a lot of time. For example, if you're making a multi-continent, multi-culture ethnographic study, it is going to cost a lot and it is going to take a lot of time. But there are hundreds of other design approaches that use good user research methods that take much shorter, that you can complete in a much lower budget. The other thing that they say is that, yeah, we can't do user research because we're not scientists. Again, there are some methods which require really advanced knowledge about how human psychology works, high level of mathematics, but there are hundreds of other methods that require nothing more than just attention and an openness to listen to the people that you're working with. So you don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to have a PhD. You don't even have to have a bachelor's degree to be able to do good user research. The other thing about user research is that it is kind of thought as an insight thing. People say that, oh, like we are engineers, we can't really understand people. Well, that's also not true. Your lifestyle, the way that you dress, the how many tattoos that you have, your belief system, this has nothing to do with your capability for doing user research. People come from very different paths throughout their lives. They have very different perspectives, and they are all just as capable of doing user research and working with actual users. This one is my favorite, where they say, oh yeah, this is a small project, and we don't have the budget for it. As I mentioned, there are multiple ways of doing user research that doesn't have to cost a lot. And I'm going to show you a really good example for this. Have you heard of or seen this thing? It's the big dog from Boston Robotics. It is basically an autonomous robot that is designed to help with military operations. The company pulled out a video for this. I'm just going to show it to you quickly. So this is a loud robot. It is fairly robust. It carries a lot of weight, climbs areas without problems. I think it can survive on the terrain, right? See how he kicks the robot and it just doesn't trip? I mean, I probably would have tripped if he did that. So again, really, really capable robot. So they said, I think this is ready. Let's take it for a test run. So they called a bunch of soldiers in, and they gave them this robot to try for their one of their practice sessions. But the squad came back the next day and said, we don't want this. The reason? It's very loud. When you are trying to carry out a secret military operation, the last thing that you want with you is a diesel engine that runs at a high-speed voice. It can carry a lot of things, but actually it doesn't help. At this point in time, they have already spent $32 million on this project. So had they asked the actual users of the system what they wanted, they could have done something maybe slightly different with those $32 million. Again, this is a fantastic engineering achievement, but it actually solves no user problems. So this is a case where no user research was a very expensive way to move forward. So we talked about why it is actually not, it doesn't have to be expensive. We talked about why everyone can do this. But then, if it is so simple, if it's something that everyone can do, why are these people still complaining? It's not because they're bad people. It's not because they're stupid. It's because they probably have had very bad experiences with simple research techniques that went really bad. And again, these are very common across the path. For example, they might have been a part of user research that started with no questions. It's basically like, yeah, let's just go out and ask the users what they think about a product. That's such a big question that is hard to focus. And the way that you diverge that focus costs you a lot when it comes to the analysis. So having a focus at the beginning of your user research, having a question, is extremely important. Another problem that they could have seen was using the wrong research method for the wrong type of question. It is very common to mix behavioral questions and attitude questions together. For example, if you want to know what people think about your product, the best way to do this would be maybe a survey, not a usability test. But if you want to see how people are using your product, a usability test would be much better than sending out a survey or presenting a pop-up and saying, what do you think about this? This, again, is a mismatch. Another thing is actually working with the wrong type of users. Have you guys heard about guerrilla usability studies? So it is basically a technique that says, if you do not have the budget for conducting a large study, you can just go to the cafeteria and actually ask people what they want. I think that's a terrible idea, because there's a very little chance that your particular users will be in that cafeteria doing exactly the things that you're trying to find out. Yes, if you're trying to build a system for university students, and if you go to the cafeteria at the university, then you have a chance. But if you're building a rocket, science, knowledge management system, that is probably the least and the last place that you should be going to gather insight from your users. So just asking random people how they would use a product is not good user research. And finally, analyzing the findings as a small team, and only a limited small team, diminishes the value of user research, because that small team provides only a given perspective, only a small perspective of what we can learn from that user data, so it actually diminishes the value of the results. Another one is just writing a report that tells a lot about how the team went out to get the data, how much work they did, all the hardships that they did, without really focusing on what the insights mean and what the company can do about that. So all of these problems, they can be avoided. And today I'm going to share with you 3 simple methods that you can use to avoid that. So I'm going to start with what I call the user tracks. Basically, it's a way to find the problem by looking at the actual user data. Then we're going to actually work with actual users, the correct actual users, to get to those insights by a method called field immersion. And then we're going to understand the big picture together with the team using a method called shared analysis. So I'll just go ahead and dive in. Instead of having that big meeting where everyone just shares their opinions, it's better to look at the user data to understand where the problems may be. And if you actually have things like analytics or data logs, this is more simple. It is very, very simple. So for analytics, you can look at top entry paths and exit paths. You can look at how the time spent on the page. You can look at things like session length to understand the behavior of people who are actually using your website or the app. There are other types of data that you can use as well, such as looking at the top used features and how people use those features. You can look at collection sizes. For example, if you are making a music app, you can look at how many playlists people have. You can look at how many songs per playlist they have. Say if you're making an email application, you can look at how many folders people have. So looking at those collection sizes will give you an idea about the typical type of use and the things that may be deviating from that. Time of use and frequency of use are very important too, especially if you're working with a mobile system, because your assumptions about how and where your application might be used will be shaken when you look at that time of use data. Device distribution is an excellent one, especially when you're working with the executive teams, because all the executive teams think that the only model of cell phone that is out there is iPhone X. So when you show them the device distribution data, they do understand that there are many other varieties and very different types of usages just by looking at the data in a very simple way. You can go beyond that and look at what happens around that usage experience by looking at things that the users have filed with your call center, the outbound calls, the complaints that you get, or anything that has been shared on the app stores. These are very valuable reviews and inputs that you can get to identify what can be wrong with your product. The way to look at this is not to take it side by side. You don't look at it and say, oh, like here's a complaint, this must be a research question. On the opposite, you look at it as a group. You look at the whole data together and try to tease out questions out of that. So let me just give you one simple example. Let's say that you see that the bounce rate spikes on Mondays. The first questions that you may ask is like, how long has it been like that? Is it a pattern, or did it just start to happen? What are the other metrics that change on Monday? Then you'll start looking around the phenomenon that you have identified. Maybe there is something in the real world that happens on Mondays. Maybe you are doing something on Sunday that affects that problem on Monday. I used to work with a lot of banks, and one of the immediate pattern that we saw was the session length for the mobile applications got extremely short on the 1st and the 2nd and the 15th and the 16th of the month. Why do you think that is? Salary payments, right? People want to make sure that they actually receive their money for no other reasons. I mean, that's a question that we had to generate by looking at the data and having those insights. So once you have those questions, this is the time where you start identifying what isn't working and what we can do better. On day one, you identify the themes that are going around, you look at your data, and on the second day, you understand what this data means so that you can move forward with a question in hand and enhance it with more data. So now that you have a question, instead of actually going and randomly asking people what they think about something, you can do something called a field immersion. Field immersion is a very simplified technique where you actually go to where your users are. They can be the employees, they can be the actual users of your mobile application, and actually work with them on their site to understand what their problems are and how they're actually using the system on a day-to-day basis. We use this in a company that I work in. The company is called Lola Flora, Çiçek Sepeti in Turkish. This is the highest traffic flowers and gifting site in the world. And our product portfolio included premium, roses, chocolates, custom cakes. It was the best product management experience I had. It was sweet. My wife loved it when I brought work to home because it was like, oh, like they came up with these new truffles. Do you want to try it? So it was very good. One of the things that this company did, and they were proud of this, was they actually did everything end-to-end in-house. So they had like an internal, a home-brewn fraud system. They did a lot of the accounting system, in-house, and they actually wanted to control the entire flower and the gifting experience. And to be able to understand that, they were like a lot of documents, people that we can talk to. We did something else. We actually made flowers. This was one of the most popular arrangements that they sold, and right next to it is me with the arrangement that I did. So to begin this, we actually went very end-to-end. So we started the day at the big flower marketplace, where there are auctions on the different type of flowers so that you get fresh flowers for the day. Again, this is like early, like 5, 6 in the morning. We waited in line to get our bunches that were like pre-auctioned at a particular price. We made sure that we got the right bunches, but I mean, you see, these are not the nice flowers that you have. You need to take these and actually process them before the day starts. This is one of the small ateliers that we had for making flowers, and we spent the day there making the orders that came in. This is the master florist that worked with us that day. Luckily, he kind of prepared a lot of things for us so that we didn't have to trim the entire flower base. And once we got at that stage, it was around 7 o'clock or so, we started waiting for the first order to come, and it did. And that was just such a trouble. We had absolutely no idea how to put together a simple arrangement, right? So we struggled to make sure that it's all good. We tried to make sure that we wouldn't get any complaints out of that. And this guy who is an expert on this was probably looking and say, like, what the hell are these people doing? He was probably laughing at it. He probably does that arrangement within like 5 to 10 minutes. I spent around 20 minutes to make sure that it is actually good. Why did I spend that much time? Because it actually is checked visually from via a different QA team. So I had to put it up on a special board, add the little gifts and the personal note with the barcode number, take a picture of the arrangement with the barcode number via a terminal, send it back and wait for the approval. Was this the end of it? No, this is all about delivery, like 90 minutes delivery in lovely Istanbul traffic. Have you been to Istanbul? Well, this is the TomTom data. Istanbul has the 6th worst traffic in the world. Worse than Rio, worse than Beijing. So this taught us a lot of things, not just by putting together flowers, but seeing the entire end-to-end experience from the flower, all the way down to the customer who actually received the flower. This was where we worked, and this is like a very nice space, agile, nice place, like beautiful offices, comfortable chairs, but this was where the actual work happened. So seeing this contrast on a personal level taught us a lot about this experience. We basically spent just a single day, although we wasted a lot of flowers, but in a single day, a lot of the analysts, a lot of the designers knew what it meant to actually create a good experience for the end users. I worked in a bank named Garanti. Basically, they're the subsidiary of BBVA in Turkey. Their size is, I'd say, roughly the same as Nordea here, and maybe like 1/3 of DNB Bank. So they're a significant bank. And in the bank, and I was the senior vice president for design and development there. We had a lot of resources. We had the best offices. We had the best people to work with. Similarly, when we worked with BBVA, heart of Madrid, beautiful campus, everything. But then when we go out, we saw a different reality, and that reality teaches us a lot of things. This is the power of that immersion. When you go out to the field, when you work with actual users, you learn very different things. There's a way to approach this, which is called a very simple field guide. Basically, you forget your role at work because you are the creator. Now you're there to actually listen and learn from your users. You should have a loose list of questions, and you don't have to create this from scratch because you actually did this on day 2. Remember this, where you actually started asking questions when you looked at your data? This could be a good starting point for the questions, plus anything that you may want to ask your users. It is a good idea to dress a little bit less casual than normal because when they expect to see you, you want to give them the signal that today is slightly different and you're not there as whatever product manager, whatever developer. It's a different type of relationship today. And it really helps if you go with pairs, because once you get into that analysis mode with your users, it is very easy to get carried away and focus on things. 2 people, when you do this together, it is a lot harder to be influenced with what the user is saying and seeing what they're actually saying. Once you get there, there's one simple thing that you need to do. You just ask your question, you shut up, and you observe. This is not an interrogation. They probably have a lot of answers, but it is not. You're not a cop trying to pull that from the users. They should share with you the most salient things, and you should do that by just asking the question, shutting up, and listening to them. There are 4 really terrible things that you should never, ever ask in your studies. The first one is, what do you think of this feature? Well, I mean, this is a nice question, but it provides very little insight to you. It's all about the behavior. It's all about the opinions of the users. They may be influenced by who you are and when you are asking the question. So this is not a very good question to ask. Another one is, how would you design this? Well, I think the intention behind this is very good. But they are not the designer. They don't know why a particular feature was designed the way that it was. They don't know all the enterprise politics that made this feature the way it is. They don't know any of the technical constraints. So they'll just give you their opinion about how they should be designed for that particular user, which may not be your main user to begin with, right? So this is also not a very good question to ask. Another bad one is, hey, my name is Albert and I built this. This cuts through that conversation because people do not want to be hurtful to each other. People want to be nice. And if they have really terrible feedback about your product, and if you introduce yourself as the creator, it is very likely that they actually won't share with you the salient and the important pieces that make your product what it is today. Another one is, as you see people struggling, you may say, oh, I didn't realize it was like this hard. Again, not a bad intention, right? It is actually very good to be able to empathize with your users and understand that they are struggling. The problem with that is it puts them at a really bad place. They may not be struggling with it, for example. They may not think that they're struggling with it, but once you say, oh, you must be struggling with this, that breaks that behavior. So instead of these, focus on behavior. Just ask how or when the last time they used feature X was. This focuses on the behavior and allows them to tell you a story about how they are using your product. You can also ask them to do a particular thing, just like show me how you normally do X. Or if they don't show it to you, you can actually ask them to demo it in a slightly inviting way and see how they go about that. Only after you cover this behavior, then you can ask about the opinion. Then you can ask about how do you feel about this, what does it make you think, so that you actually get their behavior as well as the opinions about how they're using your product. You should always take notes and make sure that if you are taking pictures, you should have their permission to do so. There may be cases where you want to show the people where that particular feature is or how they should be using the system. Do that at the very end. I think it's a good gesture. It also shows that you have been listening, and it also shows them that you are actually caring about them. And one very important thing, you're there to learn, and don't forget that research question that should always come with you. So this was the third and the fourth days where you actually went out to the field and looked at what the people are doing and why are they doing it the way. So you identify your questions, you prepare your field guide on day 1, day 3, and then the next day you visit the site, make sure that you are letting them know that you're coming, and then you collect that information together. So you had a good question to begin with, and then you followed up with the right methods with the right users. Now it's the crucial time to do analysis. And this is hard because a lot of companies still do this in a very small team. When you do it in a shared way, it opens up a lot of things. I'll show you the most common example of how you do this in a bad way. So the visionary says that we should build a green sports car. So executive team says this is the thing to do. Everyone's aligned around the vision, and people start executing. At some point in time, you look at the product and say, well, there's something wrong with this. Like we probably need to do user research to figure out why it ended up this way. So a huge committee convenes, and they talk about why they should do user research, who they should go with. They send the report to the manager's approval, then to the vice president, then to the prime minister, then to the king. King disapproves, comes back to the committee. Takes like months to go through this. And then once it's approved, a small team goes out and does their user research. And while they're doing this secret, insanely executive activity, You wait and look into the horizon. You wait for a few months maybe, and then one day someone shows up and says, you should change your login. This is a terrible way to do analysis for user research because it comes from the ivory tower. It's opaque, and I'd say it's very arrogant. It doesn't probably cover everything that was going on in the user space. It is prepared by a small group, and it is close to contribution. And that is why if there's any problems with this type of analysis, it is caught at a very late stage. Instead, you can do something much more interactive with everyone who's involved, called a shared analysis. It's completely open, and it's team-focused. It is easy to understand because it's basically built by the people who are supposed to consume it. The more contribution you have, the richer it gets and the more relevant it gets. And errors are caught very easily so that you can fix them and actually don't waste precious cycles doing terrible user research. And it is very, very simple and very fun to do. So the most important thing is to separate those problems and the solutions that you hear. Because the research data is very rich, you may actually hear or identify solutions that are coming from the field immersion activity. It is good to separate those two because there's the problem space where you started with that research question, and then there are suggestions that may solve those problems. So separate those two for your analysis. Get everyone involved or who may be involved in the user research in a room and basically fill the walls with your observations, your thoughts, your insights from the field, and group them together. There's a very simple and fun technique called KJ technique. I'm going to share the link on my Twitter and my LinkedIn page. It's basically a structured method for grouping thoughts and picking the most relevant ones out of that big team. And once you have this map on the wall, it is very natural to see terrible things. You will see things that you were completely not expecting. You will see things that will make you feel bad because you thought your assumptions are invalidated with solid data. And it is good to acknowledge these as a team and then move on. Only after you did this, then you can start talking about suggestions and the solutions to the problem at hand. Again, if I were to emphasize one thing about this phase, it's actually separating the problem and the solution space. So once you do that, you have an analysis, a set of insights that the people in the room know, right? But it is very rare that the product that is being worked on is limited to the people in this particular room. So there's a good way to share it with other people. Basically, you always anchor your sharing experience to the research question that you set out the answer with. You start with the problem. You basically briefly tell what has been done, and then share just 3-5 findings. As I mentioned, spending even a half day in the field will create a lot of rich data. Focus it and make sure that people who are reviewing this can understand it. It is very important to show the research material, whether it's your notes, it's the videos, or the photos that you've taken, and be very transparent about your process, because this is actually very hard. You get good at it with experience, but being transparent about your process and showing those imperfections tell a very good, very solid story. I would like to share a few tips about how you can prepare this presentation. Basically, keeping it simple is a good way to focus it. It has to be meaningful. It has to be impactful to the people who are looking at it. We talked about grouping related themes with the KJ method, so this is something that you can also share in this presentation. And be open and honest about things that you are not expecting so that everyone can make sense of it. Does this sound simple? Because it is. I'll just run you through a very simple fake presentation about a study that could have been done with these 3 methods. So let's say that we are Piezo Bank, right? We did a user research on the loan experience on the mobile application. So this is our title slide. It basically says, the show is about to start. And then you basically present how you got into this area. This is very important because you don't just go and say, hey, we did this user research. You say, we have solid reasons to worry about this thing. And then you focus on the fact that there may be a problem here. Again, you can't for sure say that there is a problem, but you actually back it up with your previous experience, your data, and your educated insights about why this might be a problem. Then you talk about how you actually did this. You list out your assumptions. You be clear about your questions and hypotheses, and you describe why you chose particular methods and how you actually went to the right users. Again, this is a way to say that we are aware of some of the things that may be going on. We may have some blind spots, but at least we know that we are aware of these limitations, and we did the right. We used the right methods to alleviate some of these problems. And then you start by sharing very crisply some of your findings. So here we assume that we found out that the lone pages are not inviting the users to explore. This is basically saying, let's be clear about this. There is a problem here. Right after this, you back it up with actual user data. Again, this may be transcripts from interviews. These can be videos. These can be photos. These can be quotes from the actual users. These basically show you that this is not something that we're making up. These are actual users who are using it. A lot of the companies who are not used to user research have a shock when they see this slide. Their first reaction is, well, no, I know the users. That's not how they do. Well, actually, that's not how the users work. Here's the evidence. Another thing that we always hear is that, well, that's not how I use it. Well, then you may be alone, because this is actually how the users are using it. So this evidence builds up a good case for how you identify the problem, what you did about it, and what you can do to fix these. And when you list the possible solutions, again, solutions, not just the solution, you basically give everyone the signal that there is a possible way forward, and this is an easy thing to fix. And there are multiple solutions that we can pick from. This is not the end of the presentation. You end the presentation by saying, do you think there are other people that would be interested in hearing this? This is your way of putting forward your expertise, sharing it with other teams, not only with maybe the design team, not only with the product team, but maybe with the customer experience team, maybe with the program managers, maybe with the people who are working on the product portfolio, so that you amplify those insights to as many people as possible. And when you hit a new question that did not have an answer, you pull those people in, start a new round, and do this again with a new team that creates a new insight. So this was the shared analysis part, where we talked about how we can analyze data together and make sense of it. You take one day to analyze things, you check your assumptions, go back to your data, and maybe add new things to it from the previous phases. And on day 6, you create a presentation where you, or maybe a prototype if you have the chance or have the time, to tell everyone about how you found the problem, what you did to make sure that it was the right problem, and how you worked it through in a methodological way with the right people to get to the actual insights. So today we talked about user research in very general terms. It is basically a way to ask deliberate questions about a question that you care about. Then you work with your actual users to understand their needs, and then you discuss with your team to come up with design solutions that can meet those needs. Right? We talked about how we start the process by looking at what isn't working and why is it not working. And for this, I recommended a method called user tracks, where you look at the actual user data and deduce insights from those. Look at that data to identify the problems, to feed your next step, which is understanding why your users are doing what they're doing, and to work with them to understand what they're going through on a day-to-day basis. For this, I recommended a method called field immersion, which is a very simple, short method that puts you together with the actual users. You learn from them, and you create insights from those. And once you are done with that, we looked at what we didn't know about the users and what we can do to move them forward by using a shared analysis metaphor, so that we have a common understanding, multiple solutions for the problem at hand, and we don't do it alone, we do it with everyone. Me and my teams have used these methods with many clients who were really, really reticent about starting with research. At the beginning, they were actually very uncomfortable. But around the second round, where we started doing this for a couple of times, they started relaxing. And they actually started enjoying the process, because through this, they were able to find new problems that they have never seen before. They started to hear a lot of interesting stories, and they got to experience what their users are going through every single day in a very simple and a straightforward manner. This allowed them to improve many new things that they did not expect, so they started liking it. I hope that the simple methods and the tips that I shared with you today are also helpful for you in creating really good user experiences that you're proud of. Thank you very much. If you would like to get the slides, there's a link that you can use. It's a 10 megabyte file, very simple, ndc.arasbilgen.com. It will be out there for maybe like a couple of weeks. If you have any questions about user research, please feel free to contact me on LinkedIn or Twitter, or if you have any questions right now, I can take them. Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Enjoy the beer.